Hey guys, welcome to Nature's Neighbors. My name is Amanda, and today I actually want to talk a little bit about our summer 2024 garden. This past summer, we had a 200 square foot garden, and in such a small amount of space, we were able to grow such an abundance of food. We had a variety of tomatoes, bell peppers, jalapenos, lettuce, kale. We did seeded watermelon, and we also had herbs such as basil, sage, thyme, and cilantro. And honestly, now that the summer season is over, it's mid-fall as I'm recording this, as you can tell by my cold weather gear, and the garden is kind of being put to rest for the season. I thought this was a really great opportunity to just reflect on and share our gardening journey. So with that, let's dive into this. First thing I want to talk about is how we actually built this garden. Like I said, it was 200 square feet, and we managed to build everything for just under $500. I really want to break down how we were able to have such a prolific garden for so cheap. The first thing we did, of course, was choose a proper location that received full sun. Now, me and Kevin, we actually live in an apartment, and there is no green on our property at all. It is nothing but concrete and streets and houses. We are fortunate to where my grandmom lives a couple blocks away within walking distance, and we somehow convinced her in March to let us build this vegetable garden, and she would get rewarded in produce. So she gave us the okay. The first step, of course, was to survey her land and see where the best spot was that received full sun, where we could grow the vegetables we wanted to grow. Once we found a location on her property, it was time to get to work. I spent $70 on two 6x3 by 1 foot raised beds off of Amazon, and we assembled them, got them secured to the ground, and began to fill them with organic brown material such as leaves, sticks, and cardboard. We realized we needed a third raised bed for the watermelons, but I wasn't trying to spend more money on just a bed because I already knew it was going to be so much money that we had to spend on other things. With that being said, we decided to build another raised bed and the fence for our garden out of free wood pallets. Wooden pallets are all over. They sit out on the side of the roads, they sit out in the back of businesses, and they're free for anyone to use. We were a little mindful with the quality of the wood that we were going to choose. We wanted something that didn't look like it was on its last legs, wood that still had a couple years left. So we went through them, decided what pallets were the best for us to use. And to make the raised bed and the fence for the garden, what we did was we got a crowbar, we got a hammer, and we popped off some of the middle pieces of the wood because we just wanted like a frame, if that makes sense. Next, we took our extra wooden boards along with some scrap pieces that we cut up with the handsaw, and we connected everything together with our nail gun. And once everything was nice and sturdy, we set it on the ground and also filled that with brown organic material. Now, making the actual fence was a little more labor intensive. We took our fence frames, we sanded them down with sandpaper, and laid them out to be painted black. We applied 2 to 3 coats of black paint on all sides and allowed adequate time to dry. Once the fence was dry, we measured out and cut pieces of chicken wire that we received free off of Facebook Marketplace. And using a staple gun, we attached the chicken wire to the frame. Now, these completed pallet frames were going to serve as the front and back corners of the garden, but we still needed to figure out a fence idea for the sides of the garden. Originally, we were going to use these pallet frames around the whole entire garden perimeter, but after we completed just those few, we realized it was way too time and labor intensive, and we decided to just pivot. So instead, still using extra wooden boards from the pallets, we decided to sand those as well, paint them black, and essentially make them into posts. In various spots that were on the sides of the perimeter, we dug holes that were about 1 foot deep, and using a mallet, we drove these posts into the ground and filled the holes back up. And to anchor the front and back frames into the actual ground, we used a handsaw to cut up some scrap wood into small pointed stakes. We marked the length of the frames, sent these stakes into the ground with a mallet, and we actually just took our nail gun and secured the pallet frame to the stakes that were put in the ground. At this point, all that was left was to wrap the chicken wire around the sides of the fence and secure them to the posts with the staple gun. As far as entryway in and out of the garden, we took 2 pallet frames into front and back doors by just attaching it to the fence with a gate latch kit. And that was it. The fence and the raised beds were officially done being constructed, and at this point it was time to start filling the garden with all of our material. My brother was kind enough to let us borrow his truck for multiple days in order to pick up all of the material we needed to get this garden finished. We spent $100 at our local landscaping company to pick up 2 yards of screen topsoil versus spending $180 to $190 to get it delivered right to the house. 1 wheelbarrow at a time, we began the tedious process of unloading the soil from the truck into the garden, and it took many hours, but finally we had enough soil to where we filled all 3 raised beds, our various pots, and still had some soil left over for future use. We knew that as far as mulching the ground went, we wanted wood chips instead of just leaving the grass exposed because we really didn't feel like dealing with lawn care later on down the line. The borough that we live in has free wood chips and free leaf compost available for its residents. We drove the truck over and we began multiple trips of loading up and unloading all of these wood chips and leaf compost into the garden. This probably took 3 or 4 trips to do all of the wood chips, and the leaf compost we were able to get done in 1 trip. This whole thing of filling up the garden with the materials was definitely, I think, the most taxing part of the whole process because it was so much physical labor involved. However, where you are saving in money, you're going to be spending in physical labor, time, and energy. And we did choose the latter, and we were more than happy with it once everything was said and done. I am going to list out a full cost of what we spent versus what we got for free, just so you guys can actually see how we were able to do it for just under the $500. With that being said, the garden was finally finished and it was ready for actual planting to happen. So like I said earlier, we planted a variety of tomatoes. We did sweet bell peppers, jalapeno peppers, lettuce varieties, kale, seeded watermelon, and we had multiple things of basil, sage, cilantro, and thyme. I'm going to list everything out so that you can see how much of what variety we actually planted. We started all of our seeds indoors in early March, and we brought everything to the garden to be transplanted the first weekend of May. We also direct sowed our watermelons right into the bed because they do prefer to not have their roots disturbed. Now the watermelons, they took a little longer, of course, to form fruit. The first month of the watermelon growth was really just creating vines and flowers, but eventually they did start to form their little itty bitty fruits, and it was really beautiful to just see how they grew to these ginormous watermelons that we get in the stores. We did get a total of 10 melons that fruited. However, we found out that we were actually overwatering some of them. We found this out when we went over one day, and it was like 3 or 4 melons that were just split open from the water pressure inside. So that was a lesson. We dialed back the water, and at the end of the season we ended up still harvesting 5 really amazing watermelons. So that was a great experience. As far as our lettuce and our kale goes, we did succession planting the whole summer so that every few weeks we would be able to continue eating fresh salads all season long. By mid-July, we started harvesting tomatoes and peppers. They were growing beautifully, the color was amazing, the taste was absolutely delicious, and everything was going really good for a few weeks. But eventually, the tomatoes started to outgrow their tomato cages. It got to the point where they started to actually fold under their own weight, and we realized pretty quickly that we needed to get them additional support. We didn't want to put any poles in the ground because the tomatoes and peppers were already established and we really did not want to disturb the roots. So what we did was we went to Home Depot, we bought some PVC piping, cut it up to size, and we basically made, like, I don't know what to call it, a makeshift overhead trellis. It was like we made a little support. You can see it in the picture here that it was basically piping that went above the plants, and we would actually tie the plants to the piping with twine or with string. This held out pretty well for the remainder of the season, but I think going forward next year, we definitely learned a big lesson on like making sure that you have something that can sustain their heavy weight. We also had a bunch of basil, sage, thyme, and cilantro. Some of this we used fresh, some we froze, and some I dehydrated for future use. We didn't have a scale, unfortunately, to actually weigh our produce, our harvest, and that's definitely something we're going to do in the future. But I can say that we had such a bountiful harvest. We were picking from this garden multiple times a week and eating fresh from it all summer. So it was really amazing. And with all that being said, I do just want to end on our plans for the 2025 garden season. Like I said earlier, this was a 200 square foot garden, and in just 3 beds, a few pots, and 200 square feet, we were able to have so much food. And it's going to be even more amazing next year because we more than tripled our size of the garden. We convinced my grandmom to have her whole side yard dedicated to the garden, so it's going from 200 square feet to 750 square feet. We've already started the reno projects on this. I did buy 2 additional raised beds. We set them up, so we now have 4 raised beds in total. We're also going to have an additional raised bed on the side that we're just lining with fallen tree logs. We have a shaded area in the garden that we are dedicating to mushroom growing. And we also have an open compost area that is actively cooking, as they say, so that we can have our own compost for next garden season. There is going to be more coming to this garden, but it probably won't be in the works until early spring in preparation for the summer growing season. We're going to have a butternut squash arch. We're also growing zucchini. We're going to have a bed full of salad greens, a bed full of beans. We're going to have 2 beds with a variety of tomatoes and herbs, and we're also going to have a bunch of bell peppers. We're going to be growing red and yellow watermelon next year, a bunch of flowers, and more stuff, but we don't know exactly what yet. It's still in the planning process. However, we are so fortunate that we were able to extend this garden. We're so fortunate to have the opportunity to grow possibly all of our food for the summer. And we're going to be preserving a lot of this food in the means of canning and freeze drying and dehydrating and freezing. So I'm really hoping that next summer we'll be able to preserve enough food to actually feed us through the winter, or at least part of the winter. It is a lot of changes that are going to be happening, so make sure that you're following along. Like I said, for the winter we're going to definitely be resting, both ourselves and the garden, but we do have a lot of projects planned for the future, and we want to take you guys along for the journey. Thank you everyone for your time. I really hope that this video could inspire you all to maybe get your own garden going. You don't need a lot of space. You don't need a lot of money. You can build something like this for cheaper than we spent. It's just going to take a little creativity, a little imagination, and a whole lot of patience and physical labor yourself. But gardening is revolutionary. Gardening is the most amazing thing you can do. You know, reconnecting to the earth, reconnecting to your food. And I really hope that this just inspired you all to get a garden going as well. So with that being said, stay tuned. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and we really appreciate all of your time today. Thanks, guys.